All right, this is section 4.6, and we're going a little bit off from what the book has here, but our main part of the second part of chapter 4 is to solve quadratic equations, and we're just learning a bunch of different methods. So in this video, we'll have one new method called algebra steps, and then at this point, we should have three methods, which we'll talk about here in a second. And then we're going to determine like which of those three methods is best for solving a quadratic equation, right? So one of the reasons why we have multiple methods is sometimes one method is easier than the other. Okay, so this is a big, huge summary of what we're doing in the second part of chapter 4 here. Here's your methods for solving an x squared. And this is honestly the order I would actually go into. So the last method we got to learn is algebra steps. And the trick here, this might be a good thing to write down, is algebra steps works only if there's no x part. So what I mean by that is like normally you have like x squared plus x plus 6. Okay, and so algebra steps won't work there because you have both x squared and x. However, if you have just x squared, then you can solve it with algebra steps, right? So that would be what I mean is just like cancel out the plus 2 with minus 2. I want to get this example down, by the way. And then multiply by 2 because this is a divide 2. So multiply both sides by 2 to cancel that out. So we get x squared equals 16. And then you can cancel out an x squared by doing the square root of both sides. Okay, and so one of the tricky parts here is oftentimes I'll see students just write 4. Okay, but see if you can figure out what's wrong with that. Okay, maybe pause the video if you need a little longer to think. So generally x squareds have two answers, and so no matter what method we use here, generally you're going to get two answers. And here the square root of 16 is both positive and negative 4, so we get plus and minus 4 are our two answers for x. And if you weren't sure, you could plug them in and you'd see that they're right. Okay, so that's the algebra steps method, and it works if there's no x part. Okay, so when we determine our method, that's what I would look for. I'd look there first. Factoring is really a good method because it's fast, especially if you're good at factoring. The tricky part is it's not always going to factor, right? So if it doesn't factor, then we're going to fall down and do what's called the graph method, which we did before, where you kind of plot it, find where it crosses on the x-axis, the 2 points where the parabola crosses. Those are your two answers. Okay, and that'll work as long as we have real solutions. And then the final part, which we haven't quite learned yet, is the quad formula works all the time, right? So you could actually do the entire homework for today with quad formula. We haven't learned it. Technically, you learned in Algebra 1, but we haven't reviewed it yet. I just want to put it out there because it's coming later in this chapter, and that works for all real and what's called imaginary solutions. They have these little number I, which again, we're going to learn about in the later part of chapter 4 here. But for now, it'll just be these first three methods. So we know these first three. So you'll use one of these three methods to solve it today. Okay, so I'm just going to give you one here. Solve it. So the first step would be like which method. So again, pause the video, see if you can find the method, and then solve it and find the answers from there. All right, so my hope is here that you realize that there's no x part. Okay, so that means there's no x, there's just x squared. So we can do algebra steps. All right, and I like this because you're super familiar with it. Cancel out the plus 10 with minus 10. All right, so we want to get x squared alone. So we want to divide by 4. So we get x squared equals 9. And now that we have it alone, you can cancel out a square by doing the square root. All right, and that's the algebra steps method, is get x squared alone, take the square root, and our two answers are plus and minus 3. Okay, and that's our new method called the algebra steps. Super familiar to you. You just got to do the square root at the end to get your two answers. All right, so you don't have to do like the complete solving here. If you want to solve the first couple steps of them, you can, but the main thing is which method, right? In class, I normally have them discuss this with their neighbor, but for you, I'm just going to have you pause the video, write down which method you would use. And again, if you want to do some of the steps to that method, start to solve it, you can. And then unpause the video and check your work. Okay, so here we go. The first, and again, my process is I go in this order. I look for algebra steps first. There's no x part, right? Then I'm going to try factoring if I can factor it. Okay, and then if it seems hard to factor, then I'm going to go to my graph method. All right, so sorry for the poor handwriting, but that's my steps. So on this first one, algebra steps is out because it has x squared and x, right? But it does actually factor, right? I think a lot of kids forget that this is a GCF factor. So you can bring to the front a 3 times x. So if we do that, 3x, and then I'm left with x minus 5. Okay, and now I have two linear things, right? These are both x to the first, these things, two little parts. And so you can use that zero product property, which just sets them to 0. So I'm going to set 3x equal to 0 and x minus 5, right? If together they multiply up to 0, one of the parts individually has to be 0, and then I can just solve those two parts. Okay, so divide by 3, and 0 divided by 3 is just 0. So that gets us one answer here. Now just add 5. And that gets us our second answer there of 5. So boom, we got our two answers. Okay, one up here. Again, algebra steps is out because it has x squared and x. So I would try to factor, especially because it starts with x squared. No GCF, but we can do our trick where we put x and x and then multiply to negative 22 and add up to negative 9. Okay, so I need one negative, one positive, and especially if you're good at factoring, this hopefully goes pretty fast, that it's negative 11 and 2. So minus 11 plus 2. Okay, and then you can use your zero product property, so set this equal to 0. Set the other one equal to 0. Right, and then add 11. So one answer is 11, then minus 2, and the other answer is negative 2. All right, working our way down here. Next one up is this one is algebra steps because it doesn't have x, it has just x squared. So basically we can, isolate the x squared and then take the square root. So minus 7 gives us 2x squared equals 20. Divide by 2, x squared equals 10. And this one's a little weird because it's not a perfect square, right? So when we do our last step square root, the square root of 10 is going to be a little bit more than 3. So you can either do the decimal value on your calculator, or oftentimes I'm just going to leave it as plus or minus the square root of 10. Right, if you want to change it to 3.1 or whatever the heck that is, you can. I'm just going to leave it plus or minus the square root of 10. All right, last one. So the deal with this is no GCF. If I was no algebra steps because it has x squared and x. And then if I thought about factoring, I could say, hey, is there like a GCF to this? But there's not. So I could do long factor or try long factor, like 2 times negative 9 is negative 18. But long factor, A, takes a long time. And B, I don't even know if it will factor. In fact, I don't think this one will. If I have 18 and 1, that doesn't work, and 9 and 2 doesn't work, and 6 and 3 doesn't work. Right, so factoring basically not going to work here. There's no way to get it to add up to negative 4. Okay, so this one would be a great one to do with our graph method. Okay, and if you want to watch a review of that quick, you just type this equation into your calculator and then find where it crosses the x-axis. All right, so I'm going to go into my y equals screen, clear out anything that's in there, and then start typing. So 2x squared, 2x hat thing squared minus 4x minus 9. And then I'm going to hit graph up here. And I don't need to adjust my window on this one. I can see my two answers right there. It's 3 point something and negative something, 1 point something. But to actually find them, you can use second and calc, go to number 2, 0, and then you set the bound. So for this one, bounds of 3 and 4 would work. So I'm going to do 3 and 4, enter, enter, enter one more time, and I get about 3.35. That's one answer. Okay, and then the second answer, I'm going to do second calc again, and I'm going to find a 0, do the bounds. Again, somewhere to the left would be like -2, -3, so I'm just going to do -2. Somewhere to the right would be like -1 or 0 or 1 or something, so I'm just going to do 1 to be really simple. Now I've got the points surrounded, and I don't want to guess, so I'm just going to hit enter. Again, -1.35. My other answer. Right? So those are my two answers for X. And it turned out a lot easier. Actually, couldn't even factor. So in that one, factor didn't work and algebra steps didn't work. So our only hope was graph method there. Okay, so I'm not actually going to go through and solve these ones. And you don't have to either unless you want more practice. But the big thing I would say here is which method, right? I think that's a huge part. That's our second objective is which method would you use, right? And I'll write your choices down here quick. All right, so pause the video and pick down which method out of these three, which one would you pick for each one of these and think about why. All right, so first one is tailor-made for algebra steps because it has only the x squared in it. You can just add 5, divide by 3, and then take the square root. So that one, you get plus or minus square root of 20 as your answer. That is 4 point something, right? Next one is set up really well for factoring. If you can't do algebra steps because that's x squared and x, but if you minus 21 from both sides, and then if you're pretty good at factoring, this one factors to x plus 7 and x minus 3, multiplies to the -21 and adds up to +4, and then boom, you're done, right? You get -7 and 3. So that one's pretty fast. Okay, and then this last one, algebra steps is out again because it has x squared and x. You could try to factor, but there's no GCF, so you'd have to do the long factor. And actually, I think this one does factor because for -35, you could use -35 and +1. That give you -34. Right, so you could, looks like, do long factor if you want, but when this starts with something besides 1, I usually just go straight to my graph method. Right, I don't know, it's just, to me, it's more straightforward and easier, so I just do that. And again, you could graph it like before. If you wanted to check your work and get your answers here real quick. Yeah, so I just graphed it quick. I got answers of 7 and -0.2 or 1/5. And I actually use Desmos, right? For those of you that might not have a graphing calculator, Desmos works pretty slick. Just type it in, boom, get your answers, and you're done. Okay, so that's it. The only thing today was algebra steps and then picking which of the three methods work. That is all. All right, thank you for watching.